In this slideshow, we're going to be talking about pretty much everything that's on the worksheet, just in greater detail or like clarifying a few more things. I'm going to go over some definitions that might not be on that exact sheet, but that are in the textbook or have been discussed earlier in class or are somewhere else in this chapter 13 worksheet on just a different page. So first up is the definitions and principles of, like what I just said, just what you kind of need to understand all of the stuff that we're going to be talking about. So the definitions is what we're going to go over for fiscal policy. So fiscal policy is just the governments or government officials enacting some kind of change regarding, I guess, taxation, but the economy in general, not specifically taxation. That's why there's public spending here. There's more that go beyond the scope of this class, but essentially fiscal policy is just the government doing something to enact change in the economy. And then we have, in general terms, contractionary and expansionary. Here we're talking about contractionary and expansionary policy. They're going to be just contractionary is contracting that kind of enlarged economic activity, and expansionary is expanding that really small activity. So when there's a recession, you want expansionary because you want more economic activity than there currently is. That way, that makes people spend more, that puts more money out there in the economy, called the money supply, and it just makes everybody's life a lot better. But then it can get too big, and that's when we have inflation, and that's when you want contractionary policy to bring it back down to just the perfect Goldilocks amount of monetary activity. Then there's lag. So lag was discussed on the page right before this, and it's just the kind of array of delays. We only talk about 3 here, and they're pretty all encompassing. But lag is just how much extra time, I would say, it takes for the change, the fiscal policy, the change that the government is enacting to actually affect the economy in a way that's, seen, felt. Here it says observed by the members of that economy. So if there's like some kind of taxation that's implemented for, let's go with paper, it might take 5 years for the whole once someone decides once the economy decides that there needs to be some kind of taxation on paper, the economy takes time to indicate that it needs some kind of taxation on paper to the people in charge, to the government officials that are dealing with all of this, and then they have to kind of spend all this time collecting that information, formulating what they're going to do with that information, and how they're going to go about fixing any problems that need fixing. And then implementation would be just how long it takes for that decided upon formulated plan to actually start working, to get on the ground floor and start doing its thing, what it was intended to do. So on to the second thing. Now we're getting into it. Discretionary policy. It is the actual decisions made by the government officials that affect the economy. So just looking at this standalone, because we're going to look at the other form of fiscal policy later. Looking at discretionary policy standalone, someone makes a decision, some government official makes a decision, and that somehow affects the economy. That's discretionary fiscal policy. But specifically discretionary is and discretionary is also called targeted fiscal policy. So it basically just means targeted in the sense that someone is aiming, picture like a bow and arrow. Someone's taking that bow and arrow, holding that fiscal policy. And what type of fiscal policy is it? It's targeted because they're taking it and they're aiming it at a target. They're aiming it at an economic target of this effective level of equilibrium. They're trying to do this specific thing, and that's what this specific little form of fiscal policy that they're trying to implement is intended to fix. Doesn't always do it, but that's what it's intended to fix. So moving on, so I can try to stop rambling here. The subject, or not the subject, discretionary fiscal policy is subject to time and other lag, like I just said in the previous slide. It is, here it says it's more difficult, but I will say it's more tricky to implement effectively. There's a lot more that goes into discretionary fiscal policy than, in my opinion, than there is in the other type of fiscal policy that we're going to talk about in a little bit, because it's more reactionary. It's not like there's been this set law that's been going on since 19th century, since even 5 years ago. It's, we see this problem, we've already experienced information lag because it's taken however long it's taken for us to actually see that there is a problem, us being the government workers that are dealing with this. It's taken us however long to realize that there's a problem. That's information lag. Then we have to go through that whole process of fixing it and then wait for what we did, the plan that we formulated, to actually start working. And that's different. It's more reactionary. It's for that specific problem, and we make this specific solution. And it's not proactive like the other form that we'll talk about in a little bit. So another part of that is that politicians might avoid directly involving themselves with the economy because of the way it'll make them look, because it might lose them favor with like the citizenry. And that's a big thing for politicians, because they need to be elected or reelected into office, or they have other motives that are working against the organizational motives, if you want to call it that, if you count our national economy as the working, functioning, breathing organization. Then they have other motives that may or may not align with that. And if they do, then great, because while it may be avoided by politicians, it could actually be adopted by politicians, because of the same reason, because of optics, because it'll look better that to their target audience, really, of potential voters, if they actually do something about the economy, or the situation that the economy is in. If you look at COVID, and the different stimulus acts and all these different things that different politicians were doing or not doing, it was very political. It was if you even if the actions of the politician didn't actually help or did help, either way, it's the act of doing so. It's the them making sure that they were being perceived by the the what am I trying to say? Population, just like American population, um, as like I'm the president, I'm the governor, the local politician, the whatever, and I'm doing this, I'm doing X, Y, and Z to work to make our lives better in this little weird blip of economic activity during the pandemic. And that can be a good thing, that can be a bad thing, it can be kind of a neutral thing. It just depends. Um, and last thing is that the discretionary or targeted fiscal policy is, even if it would have done something good and it was the perfect plan, the the people who put this bill into place, whatever it is, to deal with this specific problem are just 100% correct. They made the perfect little formula. But once it gets passed, approved, put into action, let's say it takes 5 years um, to actually start working and doing its thing, it might have missed the time period that it would have been actually super effective. And let's say it was contractionary. We were experiencing a bunch of inflation, and the officials recognized that this is a problem and we need to contract a little bit. We need less economic activity out there. But the economy does its own thing. The discretionary fiscal policy is kind of just supplementary to see. It's like when you have a headache and or a fever, your body's still fighting that fever on its own. But what you can do to help is take some Advil. um, and that's kind of what it is. The Advil in that um, analogy is discretionary fiscal policy. So if by the time that policy starts to actually work, um, the economy has already fixed itself, then it's going to overcorrect. The discretionary fiscal policy will overcorrect the economy and send it way too far in the other direction. So it'll be too contractionary, and it'll send us back, or not back, but down into a recession instead. And the reason why is because of these next slides. So automatic stabilizers. This is the other form of not discretionary, of fiscal policy. There's discretionary and there's automatic. So automatic stabilizers are a form of fiscal policy tools. And they are what I was saying before. It's like the body kind of just working on its own. It's doing its own thing. So a lot of them can be um, something like what you would expect discretionary fiscal policy to be. Like the example that I used would be, I don't know, maybe taxes. Um, taxes can be discretionary fiscal policy tools or automatic stabilizer policy tools, and it just depends. So the discretionary version of that would be, there's a problem, we see it needs to be fixed, let's change this tax for this period of time, and let's react by doing that and put it into place. That's discretionary. Automatic would be, there's a problem, maybe there's not a problem, but there's maybe not an economic one, but maybe there's a political problem, maybe there's a social problem, a socioeconomic problem. There's a lot of overlap here. And if it's an automatic stabilizer, it'll be a tax that's in place, such as our tax brackets, where if you make like $10 a year, you're paying basically nothing in taxes compared to, well, literally nothing in taxes compared to someone that makes, $10 million a year. They have a much larger percentage of their um, income, annual income, that's dedicated to taxes, and that is a stabilizer because um, the the more someone makes, we've learned that the the more someone makes, the more someone spends, and the tax brackets help to kind of negate that so that we don't get into this huge money supply of a bunch of economic activity, a bunch of demand, and it kind of contracts that amount because it contracts or reduces the amount of um, readily available or liquid wealth that any given person has at any given uh, level of income. So you go from $10 up to $10 million as you keep increasing over and over and over at each checkpoint, whatever the brackets are. Let's say it's definitely not this, but let's say it's like $100,000, 200, 300, 500, a million, 10 million. At each one of those, there's a certain percentage increase of uh, portion. Like there's a certain percentage that's already decided that once you meet that $100,000, you can be at 99,999. But once you get to $100,000 income per year, you're going to be paying that specific new percentage of your income as taxes, and that's the check. That's an automatic stabilizer because there's not Mr. Taxman in the government that's going to be dedicated to reviewing your personal taxes or your personal income at every step of the way. That's going to try to contract the amount of money that you have in a free supply. There's, I mean, technically there's the IRS and all that, but there's a there's not a problem anytime someone gets a raise that, and I mean problem on the macroeconomic level, that gets up to government regulators, and they don't see, oh, this guy in some random county got a raise that sets him to here, that increases that county's money supply. Let's do some discretionary fiscal policy and try to reduce his money supply so that it contracts the greater macroeconomic money supply. Excuse me. That's just not practical. So automatic stabilizer, kind of get off track there, but automatic stabilizers are just kind of doing their own thing, and it doesn't take any outer influence. It doesn't take any action whatsoever. The regulators just sit back, relax. They don't have to do anything, don't have to touch anything, and these automatic stabilizers are called, automatic stabilizers because they will automatically just keep doing their own thing. And one thing to note is that it will always work in the same, I guess direction is a good word, same direction as discretionary policy. So, like I said, kind of with that same analogy, if with taxes, there's someone that's working towards, reducing the money supply, contracting this excessive economic activity, the automatic stabilizer of taxes are going to do that. They're contractionary, and someone looking at this problem, a government official looking at this problem, is going to say, hey, we also need contractionary measures to be taken. So they're gonna, if it's to that extent, they would also enact their discretionary fiscal policy measures in the same direction, in the sense that it's downward towards the equilibrium from this high amount of economic activity. So downward is contractionary, upwards is expansionary, and discretionary and automatic work together to take it in whatever direction it needs to go. And one last thing is that it is unaffected by the lag and or types those three types of lag that we mentioned in discretionary fiscal policy. So since they're working on their own, it doesn't have to jump through all these hoops of time and human error, political kind of nonsense. There's not someone that needs to see all this information, compile it, make sure it's correct, get a team together, think about all these the best ways to help the economy in this situation, and then get it approved and wait for that plan to be implemented. It's just constantly doing its own thing. And the conclusion is kind of been covered because I rambled quite a bit, but you can kind of just read those. I'm not really going to go one by one, but they are basically one and the same. But automatic stabilizers have that key difference of not being affected by time lag, and that derives from the fact that it's just perpetual. It's just constantly going. It doesn't need anybody to work on it. It's just doing its own thing. And there's several examples. I know even in the page that this is embedded in, there's government spending is listed, and that's another big one besides taxes. The main automatic stabilizers are taxes and government spending. And government spending would be, there's welfare and relief and things like that. And one other thing to note would be that the automatic stabilizers are a good indicator of the health of an economy, because if you consider the government spending automatic stabilizers like welfare, government spending decreases on welfare because the economy is doing good. There's no one that, or not no one, but there's less people that need it. So the government spending on that decreases, and that's an automatic stabilizer. That shows that we don't need to do all of this expansion. The government spending decreases, the money supply decreases because of that. There's less kind of floating about there, but that's in and of itself an indicator. Just because less people are qualifying for welfare, less people need this or have this dependency on the government for their income, their day-to-day lives. And going back to kind of the or ending with kind of the mixture of stabilizers and the automatic stabilizers and discretionary or targeted fiscal policy tools working together, there's just so many ways that they overlap that, definitely go beyond the scope of this course, but they are both very useful types of fiscal policy tools. But as it says in that very last little point, there's good and bad, I will say, to both types. It just depends on who's looking at what and in like through what lens. There's automatic stabilizers. A lot of people have problems with the tax brackets and the like fundamentally just themselves, like what tax brackets are and how there's like this group of people shouldn't have to pay this amount more just because they make more money or less money. well, more money in that sense. Um, but then some people also find that um, it's a great way to keep um, the supply of money, I'd say, or the distribution of money more even than it would be without that. Because if you have, someone that makes $50,000 a year, paying $10,000 in taxes, that's going to impact them a lot more than someone that makes $5 million a year, paying $10,000 in taxes. That's not to say that the tax brackets are inherently good or bad. It's just there's a lot of conflicting views on that. So that's how it depends on the person that's looking at the specific issue, whatever it is. And there's just a lot of ways to interpret it. But that's why there's research, there's different countries doing different things. There's politicians and economists trying different strategies in smaller like smaller scale um, economic situations, like a little town, or maybe a section of a city, a restaurant, something like that, which gets more into macroeconomic. But there's just a lot of ways that these can overlap, and I will encourage thinking about it more so, not just in the restrictions of this course. When we're taking tests and stuff, we definitely have to, but to get a better understanding of it, definitely look beyond the scope of this course for um, a real look at why politicians are saying what they do, why uh, there's different different topics that come up on the news regarding the economy, why there's some that aren't, or some that don't appear on the news because they're taboo, or there's not enough information. And why isn't there enough information? Why is that information lack there? So that's we're getting a little off topic once again, but that for now, I'll stop myself, is the conclusion to this slideshow. So thank you. Like I said, if there's any more questions I'm not a professor, so I am not like an authority on anything like that, but I will say reference this textbook, any other textbooks, and just, well, for this class, reference specifically this textbook, but look at the other pages of this worksheet too, and the